She was the only woman on the course that day. One range, 10 targets, 20 competitors. Most of them didn't even look at her twice. The few who did smirked. One man near the ammo table leaned over to his buddy and said she should have brought knitting needles instead of a rifle. She heard him. Everyone did, but she didn't flinch. She didn't fire back. She just stepped up, locked in, and when the buzzer went off, her rifle moved like it had a memory. 10 targets, 10 rounds, 10 seconds, no misses, and when she lowered her weapon, the entire line behind her was silent. Welcome to the human story. Before we dive into this true story of disrespect, precision, and quiet power, tell us in the comments where in the world are you watching from, and have you ever seen someone completely underestimated? If this story hits you, hit that subscribe button. These voices deserve to be heard. The sun was already high when she parked at the far end of the gravel lot. Away from the lifted trucks, away from the flags flapping off tailgates and the folding tables overloaded with gear, she stepped out without hesitation. Dark boots, tan cargo pants, hoodie zipped halfway, range bag over one shoulder. Nothing fancy, nothing loud, just calm, clean, and efficient. Her name was Isolde Vance. Nobody there knew it yet. The range was full of chatter, men comparing specs, joking about recoil, arguing over optics and zero settings. They were all here for the cultist 10 and 10 challenge. 10 steel targets at staggered distance, 10 seconds, 10 shots. Not a beginner drill. Most didn't finish, some didn't even try. She didn't expect a warm welcome, but she also didn't expect the silence. When she walked past the first table, a guy in his 30s leaned back in his chair and muttered, "Just loud enough, you here to time us or take notes?" His buddy chuckled, "She's probably here for the airsoft demo." A third added, "Don't worry boys, she'll keep score while we shoot." She didn't respond, not because she didn't hear, but because she'd heard it all before. Afghanistan, Kuwait. Even at Quantico, it never mattered. Her job had never been to convince them, just to be better. At the check-in table, the man with the clipboard scanned her gear like he was looking for something to challenge. "You know what this course is, right?" She nodded. "Yes, 10 and 10. You got a timer or someone spotting for you?" She set her bag down, unzipped it, and pulled out a chrono sensor with her name etched in the side. "Self-timing, verified on last 3 range qualifiers. You want to see the log?" The man hesitated. "No, most women don't show up to this one." She zipped the bag again. "That's not a reason." He didn't answer, just checked her name off the list. Lane 12. The range marshal raised an eyebrow. "When she passed you, military? What branch? Navy?" He nodded, half impressed, half skeptical. "Don't see many women come through." She shrugged. "You're looking in the wrong places." By the time she reached her assigned table, the men to her left were already lining up gear. Tripods, rests, scopes, backup, mags, GoPros. One had a rifle with more attachments than sense. They eyed her without subtlety. One of them, young, overconfident, nodded toward her setup and said, "You bring that for practice, or is that your real entry?" She glanced at her rifle, a weathered but perfectly maintained MK2. "It's not fancy," she said, "but it doesn't miss." He smirked. "Hope you brought a sewing kit too, just in case." That was the moment, the one that always comes when the joke gets close enough to bite. The man beside him laughed, too hard, too loud, then turned to grab his gear. She stood still, let it pass, let the silence return. She wasn't here for them, she was here to remember something, and they were about to learn exactly what. The first shot rang out like a starting gun, cutting through the morning buzz and the background chatter like it meant something. The shooter on lane 2 hit his first 5 targets with confidence, stumbled on the 6th, and missed the rest in a scramble of reg rips and flinches. The buzzer cut him off mid-reload. He shook his head with a self-deprecating laugh, muttered something about dust in his trigger housing, and walked off like he hadn't just missed a chance to prove everything. The others gave him polite nods, surface-level solidarity between competitors who all secretly wanted to outshoot each other. Then the next name was called, and the process repeated. Shooter after shooter lined up, shot fast, and walked away with less than perfect runs, 6 hits, 5 occasionally. Someone reached 7 and got a brief cheer. Most cracked under pressure by the 4th shot. Some fumbled their reload. One tripped over his own sling, but none of it mattered to the group as long as there was someone else to laugh at. And today their favorite target hadn't even stepped up yet. She stood quietly in lane 12 alone and unreadable. Her rifle rested perfectly aligned on her table, untouched. She hadn't even loaded her mag yet, just stood there, relaxed, arms crossed, watching, listening. A few shooters near the water coolers started whispering, "You think she's military?" "Nah, probably some NRA class dropout. She's just trying to prove something. Happens every year, never ends." "Well," another guy said, "she probably thinks her little MK12 is going to do all the work for her." They all laughed. One of them added, "She should have brought knitting needles instead, might have had a better shot at impressing someone." She heard it, of course she did. She'd heard worse. She'd heard it in briefing rooms, on bases and hangars before deployment. She'd heard it from men who outranked her and men who couldn't carry their own gear without asking for help. She'd heard it in Afghanistan when she'd led night ops with a team who doubted her the moment they saw her face. But the difference between her and everyone else was that she didn't need to defend her place. She'd already earned it. She didn't speak when she was doubted. She delivered on lane 5. A man with a $4,000 custom AR stepped up with swagger. His crew lined up behind him like he was the final boss. The guy wore gloves with his initials embroidered into the palms. He had a GoPro mounted to his cap. His mags were preloaded in custom pouches that matched the camo pattern on his vest. The moment the buzzer rang, he moved like someone trying to impress an invisible audience. Shot after shot echoed fast but erratic. He hit 4, grazed 1, and missed the last 5. He grunted, reset his sling, turned to the crowd, and said, "At least I didn't come here." Sowing more laughter, a few claps. Someone added, "Don't worry, the real show's about to start." Lane 12's got her purse packed and ready. Still, she didn't flinch. She didn't load her rifle yet. She didn't adjust her stance or rehearse her grip. She just kept breathing, timing the rhythm of every buzzer, every shot, every failure. The wind shifted slightly, just enough to matter at the third target. Nobody seemed to notice, but she did. She checked her wind flag, not the digital readout clipped to the bench, like some others had, but the strip of red tape she tied to the edge of her sling, the kind you can't buy in stores. She finally opened her mag pouch, loaded 10 rounds, seated it with a soft, precise click. Her movement was smooth, like muscle had replaced thought long ago. She checked her chamber, tapped the forward assist, and let the rifle rest in her hands as if it belonged there. A man beside her said quietly, "You're going iron sights on this course." She nodded. "Optics slow me down." He blinked like she was joking. She wasn't. Then the range officer called her name. "Shooter Vance." Lane 12. The air shifted, the laughter died off. Even the guy with the GoPro turned to watch. She stepped forward, lifted the MK-12 as if it weighed nothing, but the way she held it made something in the room change. Her posture wasn't aggressive, wasn't stiff. It was efficient, grounded, controlled. She didn't waste time adjusting or stretching or pacing. She stepped to the line, placed her lead foot, angled her hips, and took the kind of stance only a handful of people in that crowd had ever seen before, the kind that doesn't come from training weekends but from deployment after deployment, where range time isn't sport, it's survival. The officer called out again, "Shooter ready." She gave a single nod. 10 targets, 10 seconds on the buzzer. She lowered her head. 10 targets in front of her, ranging from 30 to 110 yards. Every steel plate freshly painted. No room for doubt, no forgiveness in the timer. The crowd had stopped talking now. Phones were up. The joking had gone dry. They weren't expecting to be impressed. They were expecting a mess, a lesson, a reminder that this challenge wasn't for everyone. Then the buzzer sounded and everything changed. The buzzer snapped through the air like a spark across dry tinder, and in that instant Isolde Vance's body became a machine of memory. No hesitation, no wasted breath. Her rifle snapped up but stocked tight into her shoulder, cheek to stock like she was born there. The first shot cracked a clean strike, dead center on target 1. Her elbow pivoted, not swung. Second target hit. Her trigger reset was imperceptible. Her breath shallow but measured. Third hit. Fourth hit. The sound of steel being struck was sharper than the crowd expected. 5 hit. 6 hit. No pause, no panic. 7 hit. 8 hit. She adjusted elevation by instinct alone. 9 hit. 10 hit. 10 shots, 10 steel targets, 10 perfect impacts in just under 10 seconds. When the last round rang out and the echo dissolved into the stunned quiet of the watching crowd, no one spoke. The timer let out a final digital chirp to confirm time logged 9.8 seconds. She lowered the rifle slowly, not dramatically, not to show off, just the way a professional clears space. Safety on, magazine out, chamber checked. She didn't need to turn to know what was behind her. Dozens of people, frozen mouth slightly open, all blinking like they'd missed something, like maybe their minds hadn't caught up to what they just witnessed. The range officer broke the silence, first not with a word, just a low exhale that sounded more like respect than surprise. Then someone clapped. Just one person, a slow singular clap, then another, then the rhythm caught on, not cheering, not shouting, just clapping, solid, awkward, humble. A man near the benches said, "Holy, she actually did it." His friend replied, "She didn't just do it, she smoked it." The guy who'd made the knitting joke earlier sat with his arms crossed, face flushed. He didn't say anything. Isolde didn't bask, didn't nod. She simply packed up her rifle with the same care she'd shown from the beginning, silent, intentional, routine. She didn't glance around for approval. She didn't need it, because the only validation she ever cared about had come from years of keeping people alive who never even knew her name. As she walked past the crowd, a younger shooter stepped out of her way. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, voice soft. She nodded once. That was enough, and just like that she was gone. But her silence stayed louder than any shot ever fired on that range. By the time Isolde Vance had driven off the gravel lot, the entire range had shifted. Not physically, but in silence and posture, in the way people now looked at Lane 12, as if it had become sacred ground. No one lined up behind it again. No one dared to take her place, even though the schedule said someone should have. The clipboard guy stood there holding his pen like he'd forgotten what it was. For the man who had joked about knitting quietly packed his bag without a word, suddenly in no rush to shoot. No one made a speech. No one apologized. That wasn't how it worked. The damage had already been done, with smirks and dismissals, but what lingered was deeper shame, yes, but also awe. She hadn't yelled, she hadn't demanded recognition, she hadn't told them she was a Navy vet, she hadn't needed to. Her hands and her steel had said everything that night. The video started circulating. Someone had recorded the full 10 seconds from buzzer to final impact. It had no commentary, no editing, just raw footage and real skill. It was titled Lane 12, That's It, That's the caption. By the next morning it had over 50,000 views. Veterans recognized her. First one posted, "That's Isolde Vance, SEAL instructor from 2003 to 2010. She taught half the East Coast teams how to shoot under pressure." Another replied, "I thought she retired years ago. Guess she didn't forget." Someone else added, "We don't forget women like her, we just don't see enough of them anymore at the range." The owner added a small brass plaque to the bench at Lane 12. It read 10 and 10 Vance, no date, no logo, just that, and strangely people respected it more for that. It didn't need to say anything else. Some of the same men who had laughed started training differently, slower, smarter. They stopped making jokes. When women walked past the parking lot, one or two started asking questions instead of assuming answers. That was the real change, not the clapping, not the online shares, but the pause, the humility, the space they now gave to someone they once tried to ignore and assault. She never came back, not because she wasn't welcome, but because she never needed to in the first place. Some warriors don't need to raise their voice. They don't need applause. They don't ask to be noticed. They walk and get the job done and leave behind a silence that speaks louder than anything they could ever say. That was Isolde Vance, a woman veteran, a leader, a ghost in the system who didn't care what the world assumed about her because she had already earned the truth the hard way. The mistake they made wasn't underestimating her aim. It was underestimating her presence. Her discipline, her legacy. When the buzzer rang, they expected hesitation. What they got was precision. What they got was 10 rounds in 10 seconds, and not a single one wasted. They told her to knit. She stitched her name into the memory of every man on that range, one shot at a time. So now I ask you, have you ever seen someone like her, a woman veteran who never asked for credit but whose actions demanded respect, someone who walked quietly, led powerfully, and showed the world what strength really looks like? Tell us in the comments, say her name, share her story, because voices like hers are still too often forgotten. And if the story moved you, if it made you think twice about how we treat those who serve, subscribe to the Human Stories, because behind every quiet veteran there's a legacy that deserves to be heard. We'll see you in the next story, and until then, when someone walks onto the range without saying a word, make room. You might be standing next to a legend. When the video titled simply Lane 12 began to spread, it had no soundtrack, no special effects, no narration. Just 10 raw, powerful seconds, starting with a whistle and ending with the echo of steel striking steel. The first to raise hair, it was a veteran who had served at Bagram. That's Isolde Vance. She trained my team in 2006. No one shot better. No one was quieter. The comments came in like falling rounds on a battlefield, brief, sharp, weighted with meaning. She used to be a sniper instructor in Coronado. We bet she wouldn't last a week. She didn't just last. She taught us instead. Another added, I've never seen anyone adjust for wind with red tape. Now I get it. No one needed to ask why she was there, or why she vanished right after the perfect shot. They knew. They'd been soldiers. They understood how people like Isolde appear, not to be remembered, not to be filmed, but to finish something they promised themselves long ago. At the checkpoint, the man with the clipboard from that day pinned a printed frame of the video on his office wall. Below it, in plain black ink, just 3 words. Silent witness. Those who once laughed now stood straighter. Those who once gossiped quietly asked for more training hours. On a wooden bench at the far end of the range, a man who had once made a mocking joke now sat quietly, writing something in a notebook, then closed it. No one asked. No one needed to. The next day, 3 women came to sign up for shooting. They carried canvas bags, safety glasses, one wore shoes unsuited for gravel. But this time, no one laughed. No one said anything except, Lane 12's open. Want to give it a try? The newcomer nodded, slightly trembling. But no one pressured her. They simply stepped aside. In silence. In respect. Isolde didn't need to come back. She didn't need a podium or medals. Her test had ended long ago. Not at that place, but through all the moments before, when she did what no one else dared, without ever needing anyone to know. In the sniper world, there's a term called ghosting, disappearing from every map, every lens, every trace, leaving only the result behind, as if from nowhere. Isolde Vance was that. A ghost. A silent mark. A symbol no one dares name without reverence. And so, when you walk into any shooting range, be it Montana, Bavaria, or the edge of the Nevada desert, if someone steps in and says nothing, don't ask. Don't guess. Step back. You might be standing next to a legend. 3 days after that morning, the cultist range resumed its usual training schedule. The whistle blew on time. Familiar groups returned, Lars' team from Springfield, 3 reservists from Boise, and a few with scopes bigger than the barrels themselves. Everything seemed back to normal. But not quite, because Lane 12 remained empty. No one signed up for it. There was no warning sign, no restriction. The schedule still read open. Sunlight fell evenly as always, yet people quietly shifted left or right, leaving that lane untouched. An invisible space had formed around it, as if no one felt worthy to step in. No one said it out loud, but they all knew. That was where someone had placed a perfect full stop. Where Isolde Vance had stood, not to prove anything, but to remind them of a standard long forgotten. A man named Bram, gray-haired, a former artilleryman, approached the sign-in table carrying an old Ruger. His hand trembled slightly as he pointed to the line marked Lane 12. He said, almost in a whisper, "I'm not shooting. I just want to wipe the bench. There's dust." The manager nodded and handed him a cloth. No one laughed. No one found it strange. They let Bram pass as if entering a cathedral. He said nothing more, carefully wiping each mark away, taking care not to touch the brass plaque. 10 and 10 Vance. Meanwhile, at a training station over 500 miles away, a Navy officer, lieutenant rank, entered a briefing room. Holding up his phone, he played the Lane 12 video on the screen. "Who here thinks they're fast?" No one raised a hand. "Good," he said. "Today we relearn how to hear the wind. And if anyone asks why, show them this." He pointed to the frame frozen at the exact moment the 10th shot rang out, the final steel impact. The story of Isolde Vance didn't spread like a storm, but like water seeping into the ground. Slow, steady, unstoppable. On an old rifle forum online, users began changing their avatars to a red circle, symbolizing her wind tape. In a private SEAL veterans group, the post titled, "She corrected my left hand once," became the year's most liked. The author didn't name her, just wrote one final line. She said, "Aim with your presence, not your posture." At cultist range, as afternoon settled, a 12-year-old girl came with her father. She pointed at the plaque at Lane 12. "Dad, who's Vance?" The father was quiet for a moment, then knelt beside her and said softly, "Someone we should listen to, even if they never say a word." The girl nodded. And for the first time, she began to understand that respect isn't found in stories told, but in the spaces no one dares to fill. The evening shadows stretched long across the sand, and Lane 12 remained, not for legend, not for glory, but for the truth that had been fired from a barrel, 10 shots, 10 seconds, not a single miss. And the one who fired them, like wind passing through, left behind a silence that thundered. His name was Dorian Mace, 36 years old, a former Marine, now a part-time weapons technician and state-certified shooting instructor. He was the one who cracked the first joke that day, the one about knitting needles. When he said it, he didn't think twice. Lines like that came out by reflex, like habits no one ever questioned. But 3 days later, he still hadn't had a single good night's sleep. He wasn't afraid of Isolde. Not in the traditional sense of the word. He had been in Kandahar. He had fired from rooftops in the dead of night. He had seen friends fall right at his feet. But what Isolde left behind wasn't fear. It was shame. The kind of silence that exposes people, without words, only through action, so pure and precise that no excuse can survive it. That afternoon, he returned to cultist. No test scheduled. No one with him. Just his old AR and a gray canvas bag. He walked in, and the room paused, one beat of silence. No one spoke. They didn't have to. He walked straight to the front desk, laid down the registration sheet, and pointed to a single box, Lane 12. The manager looked up, eyes steady. "You sure?" Dorian nodded. "I'm not here to break a record." "Then what are you here for?" "To stop hiding." He walked out. No one stopped him. No one clapped his back. No one smiled. On that fine line, under the direct blaze of the midday sun, he set his rifle down and looked at the 10 steel targets as if staring into a mirror. For the first time in his life, he understood. He had always believed that speed meant courage, that power had to roar. But the girl that day hadn't needed to roar. She just needed precision. One shot, one rhythm, one truth that no one could deny. He didn't fire a test round, didn't log a score. He just sat beside the bench, pulled from his bag a roll of cheap red tape, something he had tracked down after 3 days of searching construction supply stores. He tore off a small strip, tied it to the sling of his rifle, then quietly hung the AR on the hook in front of him. When he was done, he returned to the office and said, "Lane 12 should be left as is. No more trials there. Not for me. For her." The manager looked at him for a long time, then gave a slow, quiet nod. The next day, Cultist's official website added a single line to its regulations. Lane 12, not for competition. For reflection. No explanation. No further comment. As for Dorian, he never told anyone the story. But from that day on, every time he led a training session, he always began with one sentence. Some shots changed the target, and some shots changed the shooter. Her name was Alara Quinn, 17 years old, a high school senior living with her mother in the suburbs of Reno, Nevada. Her father had served in the military. He died in a car accident during a nighttime flood when she was only 11. After that, her mother left the base, sold all the firearms, and distanced herself from anything tied to the military. Alara didn't. She grew up reading her father's notes, handwritten pages from his time at the Coronado shooting range. On one page, the ink had blurred. Whether from tears or rain, she wasn't sure. The line read, Instructor Vance said, "No bullet is worth anything if it doesn't begin in silence." Alara hadn't understood it at first, but she kept the page pressed into her geography notebook. It followed her to class, through the school years, through her grief, through quiet afternoons standing still in the woods behind her house, holding an old air rifle, shooting at empty soda cans. Then one day in March, Alara saw the Lane 12 video while riding the bus after school. No music, no subtitles, just a whistle, and 10 steel impacts falling cleanly into each other, like a melody without a tune. By the end, her hand was trembling, not from surprise, but because she recognized the name in the corner of the frame. Vance. She had seen it before, on her father's page. That evening, she asked her mother, "Did you know Vance?" Her mother was silent for a long time, then answered, "Yes, your father once said, if there was anyone worth learning from, it was her." The next week, Alara borrowed her mother's car in secret. She drove more than 5 hours to the cultist range. She had no appointment, no instructor, no companion, only a laminated sheet written by her father, with the name Vance bold at the center. When she arrived, the station guard looked at her and asked, "What brings you here?" She handed over the sheet. He asked nothing more, just nodded quietly and pointed toward Lane 12. "You can't shoot there, but you can sit." Alara walked slowly toward it. She stopped about 2 meters from the bench, didn't touch anything, just looked. Then, from her pocket, she pulled out a red ribbon, identical to the one tied around the rifle in the video. Without a word, she tied it around her wrist. A gesture quiet, but heavier than any vow. Behind her, an older woman approached. She wore a faded military jacket, her hair short and neat, her face firm but tired. She asked, "Who taught you about Untold?" Alara turned without hesitation. "My dad." "And the video?" The woman gave a slight nod, then sat beside her on the wooden bench near the range. She didn't introduce herself, didn't say her name, but Alara knew. She could feel it. The woman asked softly, "What did you see in that shot?" Alara replied, "Not speed, not skill, but certainty." "Exactly. You knew her." The woman looked straight into Alara's eyes, her voice no louder than whined through grass. "I trained under her, and I've never had the courage to return here until I saw you standing there." They both fell silent. The sun cast a long diagonal across the gravel. Gunfire echoed from the other lanes, but it all seemed to fade beside the silence that had begun to form around Lane 12. The woman handed Alara an old envelope, the front labeled in ink, "For the one who listens." Inside was a handwritten letter, the pen strokes sharp and broken, written by Untold Vance. "If you've come here not to prove anything, but simply to understand, then keep this in mind. No one is born a legend. They just choose not to respond with their mouths, but with their hands, their eyes, and their breath. And if you can hold your silence long enough, the world will tell the truth on its own. As for you, be the one who makes the bullet. Never need a reason." Alara folded the letter, said nothing, but her eyes were steadier now, as if she had just set down a piece of her youth she never knew she was carrying. Her name was Alara Quinn, 17 years old, a high school senior living with her mother in the suburbs of Reno, Nevada. Her father had once served in the military. He died in a car accident during a flash flood when she was only 11. After that, her mother moved off base, sold all the guns, and left behind everything tied to military life. But Alara didn't. She grew up with her father's notes, handwritten pages from his days at the Coronado shooting range. On one page, the ink had blurred, either from tears or rain. Instructor Vance said, "No bullet is worth anything if it doesn't begin in silence." Alara didn't understand it at first, but she kept that page pressed into her geography notebook. It followed her to school, through the years, through grief, through quiet afternoons standing still in the woods behind her house, holding an old air rifle and aiming at empty cans. Then one day in March, Alara saw the Lane 12 video while riding the school bus after class. No music, no captions, just a whistle and 10 clean clangs of steel, falling into one another like a melody with no tune. At the end, her hand trembled, not from surprise, but because she recognized the name in the corner of the screen. Vance. She had seen it before, on her father's paper. That night, Alara asked her mother, "Did you know Vance?" Her mother was quiet for a long time, then finally said, "Yes, your dad once said, if there was anyone worth learning from, it was her." The following week, Alara secretly borrowed her mother's car. She drove over 5 hours to the cultist range. No appointment, no instructor, no one with her, only a laminated sheet written by her father, with Vance printed boldly at the center. When she arrived, the range officer looked at her and asked, "What brings you here?" She handed him the sheet. He didn't ask anything else. He simply nodded, then pointed toward Lane 12. "You can't shoot there, but you can sit." Alara slowly walked toward it. She stopped about 2 meters from the bench, didn't touch anything, just observed. Then, from her pocket, she took out a red ribbon, identical to the one wrapped around Vance's rifle in the video. Without a word, she tied it around her wrist. A silent gesture, heavier than any oath. Behind her, an older woman approached. She wore a faded military jacket, had short cropped hair, a face lined with grit and exhaustion. She asked, "Who taught you about Untold?" Alara turned, no hesitation. "My dad, and the video." The woman gave a slight nod, then sat beside her on the wooden bench by the range. No introduction, no name, but Alara knew. She could feel it. The woman asked softly, "What did you see in that shot?" Alara answered, "Not speed, not technique, just certainty." "Exactly. You knew her." The woman looked directly into Alara's eyes, her voice barely louder than the breeze. "I trained under her, and I never had the courage to come back here until I saw you standing there." Both of them fell silent. The sun dropped into a long diagonal line across the gravel. Gunfire from the other lanes still rang out, but it all seemed to fade next to the quiet that had gathered around Lane 12. The woman handed Alara an old envelope, the front marked in ink with just 2 words, "For the one who listens." Inside was a handwritten letter, its strokes firm and broken, by the hand of Untold Vance. "If you've come here not to prove anything, but simply to understand, then keep this in mind. No one is born a legend. They only choose not to respond with their mouth, but with their hands, their eyes, their breath. And if you learn to hold your silence long enough, the world will speak the truth on its own. As for you, be the one who makes the bullet never need a reason." Alara folded the letter, said nothing, but her eyes were steadier now, as if she had just set down a part of her youth. She hadn't even known she was carrying.